writer and narrative designer. The game I just was part of launched 3 weeks ago. It's called The Low Road, and it's available on Steam and the App Store. Shameless plug. So before I worked for video games, I was a playwright and a stand-up comedian. And I bring that up because basically I'm very interested in how to make comedic dialogue in video games work, like especially in an interactive medium. So when I was putting this speech together, when I pitched it, I thought I could bamboozle you guys. I thought I could just get away with murder. I was going to Google just the funniest moments in video games and just figure out just talk and dissect what makes them work. But I Googled it, and it turns out that, okay, this is what I found. This, that, this, that. That's pretty much all I found that's funny in games. And if I were to give a speech on that, this would basically be it. How to make a truly funny game. Set your release date at least 6 months before you're ready to launch. Make your mechanics as clumsy as possible. Do not play test under any circumstances. And lastly, launder all your in-game text through Google Translate. And just to give you an idea how that works, here's the same slide, done that way. Much better, total improvement. Okay, so if you look up comedy games as a genre now, on Steam, basically the biggest games that you're going to find are games like Goat Simulator and I Am Bread, which are funny. They're really funny to play at a party, but there's no jokes in them. They're not. There's no writing. There's no punchline. It's all just user interaction. It's sort of like a deliberately clumsy system that is kind of hilarious to watch people grapple with. But it wasn't always this way. I remember growing up, every game pretty much I played was hilarious. They were all sort of based in a world of comedy, and if anyone played the LucasArts games, does anyone remember those? Yeah. Okay.
My best friends.
Those were the games that were they were as good as a movie. They were very interactive and very funny. But then around 1999, they started to die up. And the reason for this, I think, is the machines. So technology kind of killed comedy in games, especially 3D. As technology improved in video games, comedy just sort of fizzled. Players demanded more interactivity from their games. And the idea of playing an interactive movie with puzzles just became less and less appealing to the casual gamer. 3D environments became the standard, and players got used to a more free-flowing, immersive experience. One where they're in control, not the developers. And that's kind of the problem. Comedy requires precision, timing, and an attentive audience for it to work. In an open environment, a carefully constructed joke can be ruined by a player not being in the right place at the right time or experiencing the punchline before they even see the setup. We can't trust them, basically. And the way most games deal with this problem is to relegate all their comedy to cutscenes. The way most games deal with this problem, sorry, I did a copy-paste and it just doubled it right there. Humiliating. Okay, so gameplay is one thing and story is another. A lot of great games follow this rule. Most of them, in fact. But the problem with that is that instead of becoming a part of the story, the player just becomes a witness. So this is a very scientific thing of laughter in games and how around the time when 3D became very popular, it just fizzled and dropped out. This is last per minute in a year. Has anyone played the game Ghostbusters?
Actually really great, I think.
Yes, it's a really, if you like the movie Ghostbusters, it's amazing. It's Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis wrote it, all the cast comes back, and the gameplay dynamics are really fun. It's everything you could want from a Ghostbusters game. The only problem is that you have to play as this idiot, this zilch. It's they genetically tried to make the blandest person possible.
I actually have never seen that. I didn't know that's what you were supposed to look like.
Yeah, no, you're him the entire time. And he doesn't have any lines. And in fact, they didn't even bother to give him his name. This is his name, Rookie. It's horrible. And yeah, so instead of being a Ghostbuster, you're just this weird mute who follows him around like some stalker that they've just come to accept. And this is very common in a lot of games, not just comedy, but especially like it's very dominant in comedy. Like South Park: Stick of Truth, which I think is like one of the funniest games of the last decade. You end up playing as the new kid, another mute character that just sort of sits back while all the comedy is happening elsewhere. And this also happens in normal story, like normal, like dramatic storytelling as well. And there's a term, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the term ludonarrative dissonance, but it basically is, it's when gameplay and narrative are at odds with each other, and it makes the player feel alienated. Like they're two separate worlds. Like in Uncharted, how Nathan Drake is a ruthless murderer. He kills thousands of people in the gameplay, but in the cutscenes, he's just like a hunky Chandler Bing. Like, he's just this very likable guy who's like, oh, I don't know if we should go in there. Like, what? No, you just murdered an entire village. So yeah, this is the definition of dissonance. That's the first time it's ever been used. That's sort of the explanation. Okay, so this is what I want to talk about. Giving the player control, but also having them receive punchlines. Okay. So when I was thinking of doing stand-up for the first time, when I was 18, I went to this place called Yucks in my hometown. I took all my friends to go see it. And it was this crowd work comedian. And he basically came up, he just talked to the audience sort of naturally, and just started asking questions, and just started killing. Like, the guy would like talk about, he would be like, what's your job? And then he did like a 5-minute chunk about that guy's job. And then we'd like talk to a couple, and he talked to this couple, and they would talk about, like, he would ask them like if they had any problems going on, and then would do like 10 minutes of killer material on that couple's problems. So it was amazing, and like we were all just like, it was so spontaneous and so hilarious. Afterwards, my friend leans over to me and is like, do you really think you can do this? And I was like, no, I was kidding. I could never do this. And he's like, that's not funny. Why would you make that joke? And I'm like, well, that's why I'm not going to do it, because I'm not funny. I'm sorry. So 4 years pass, and I finally get up the nerve to do stand-up. And I'm doing show after show after show. And after a little while, I end up on the same show opening for that same comic. And it's the first time I've seen him since that show. And he goes up, and he kills, crushes, he's amazing. But he ends up doing most of the jokes he did that night. And he manages to massage the audience into basically recreating that entire night, making it feel like it's spontaneous. So I went up to him afterwards, and I was like, I saw you do all those things, but you replicated, like, it was like time travel. And I asked him about it. He said, okay, if you go up and just tell a few jokes, 50-50 chance people will laugh. But if you can make them feel like they were there, like the reason those jokes happened were because they were there, yeah, then you can kill. Like that's, you'll really have them. So I'm really interested in trying to replicate that kind of experience in video games. Yeah, basically, let me get 2 slides. Sorry, this is the first time I've ever used PowerPoint, and I'm freaking out. So yeah, how do we make the player feel like they're essential to the story, even though they aren't? So like, make them feel like they're part of the joke, even though they aren't. So these are some rules that I sort of came across while I was working on this game. And the first rule is the 10-second rule. And basically that is it's made by Ron Gilbert, who is the creator of Minigames Mansion, Monkey Island 1 and 2, Thimbleweed Park. And he says, don't let the player go more than 10 seconds without some kind of meaningful interaction. And just pressing OK is not a meaningful interaction. So number 2 is let the player know they are being heard. When I was crafting the conversations for this video game, I wanted every single interaction to lead to something and make the be unique to their choice. So whenever we did a dialogue branch, this is the first conversation of the game. Whenever they have a choice, we have unique responses for each one. That's not uncommon, but non-repeatable dialogue branches are sort of less common in video games because it takes forever. Like this is one 3-minute conversation, and there's about 40 different paths that you can go down. And yeah, it's 251 notes of dialogue just for 3 minutes. That's the longest the conversation can go. And the problem with this is like, obviously, it's going to take a lot of content just to get that working. But yeah, basically, non-repeatable dialogue branches establish a relationship between the player and the game's characters, which leads to stronger laughs and more invested. And references to the player's past behavior do even better. So if you can do callbacks within the game, I noticed that they will laugh a lot harder because it feels like they are part of. Like if they make a choice early in the game and you can reference that choice, and it seems inconsequential. Later, how am I doing for time? Does anyone know? I don't have a clock. Oh, okay, great. So yeah, references to the player's past behavior do even better. Like specific responses show that their choices matter instead of just telling them that they do. Audience will remember that. Like in the Telltale games, they basically say that they announce to you that the player will remember that. But if you can just surprise them, it's a lot more effective, I think. The downside of this approach is that this approach is very content heavy. Comedians who do crowd work have to write at least 4 times as much material as regular comedians do because they have to, your job might not be a mechanic, so my mechanic material doesn't work, but I do have some IQ material. So you have to have so much more, a huge wealth. And that's sort of the same with video games. Like the Stanley Parable, the first time you play that game, has everyone played it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing because it feels like they're responding to every single choice you make. The more time you spend with that game, the less impressive it is because once you've done it like 20 times, you're like, okay, now I am seeing the mechanics. But the first like 10 times you play the game, it's amazing. And it's great. Number 3, let the player misbehave. So, yeah, this is a sequence from the game. It's a conversation puzzle. And basically, I noticed that when too many similar options are given, the audience will realize that their hand is being steered in towards a direction. Like, you'll find this in adventure games a lot. There'll be 4 options, and they all lead to the exact same response. But if you can sort of break them of this habit and give them wildly variable options, it's a lot more exciting. So we put in things that let the player break the story. Like in this sequence, you basically can get yourself fired by doing your job very badly. That would lead to the game ending. So we created these false endings within the game that allow the player to make that choice and see how it would come out. Like, you know, at the end of movies, based on real stories, they have like the title, like they basically say, this person went on to become a senator and blah, blah, blah. So we put all these fake false endings as if like the game ended there, and then rewinds and allows them to play it. So number 4, use sleight of hand. Sort of like a magician, jokes work best when you don't see them coming. Players need to be focused to understand the joke, and upping the player's concentration level through gameplay helps to keep them distracted but focused. So the first conversation puzzle I tried doing, and I was really in playwright mode here, was I tried to do a conversation puzzle that was entirely intuition-based. So it sucked. Basically, like, there was one path that you could get to be successful, and you were just talking to this person, trying to manipulate them into doing what you wanted. But there was nothing really guiding. It felt too much like real life. Like, comedy has to be surprising, but good gameplay requires a clear sense of cause and effect. So just having like chaos thrown at you with no sense of how to deal with it, it's too much like real life. We play video games to get away from real life, so there does need to be a sense of cause and effect. So this was the first attempt at a conversation puzzle, and basically you can see that like if you're stuck here for 3 minutes talking with just these options, it's very visually uninteresting. But we have this mechanic in the game of looking through a file folder. It's very simple. And basically we ended up combining that to make these conversation puzzles where you have information that you're looking through in your file folder that will guide you to manipulate the person on the phone. And this became a lot more interesting for the player. And it allowed jokes to flow a lot more naturally and people would respond. And it was actually way easier to write too. So this is another thing we came across during playtesting, which was the goody two-shoes conundrum. And we found that seasoned gamers were way less adventurous in their choices. I had like people who played a lot of games, and they would just always be nice when talking to the NPCs. They would not be rude. They would not get into conflicts. They would just, oh man, it was a bummer because like we had all these hilarious options, but we also had like a middle of the road option if you wanted to be boring, and they always picked boring. And we found that people who didn't normally play video games didn't do this. They would take like the non sequiturs. They would choose the insulting conversation lines, and we realized it was because seasoned gamers had been burned out by too many bad endings. They were afraid of getting, like, this is a scene from Bioshock. Basically, you can get the good ending or the bad ending, and it's based on how you behaved in the game. And we found that we had to teach them how to play the game in our world. And the world of our game is social manipulation, and you're a spy for a corporate-based agency, and you're basically trying to convince people to reveal their deepest and darkest secrets. And we found that we had to teach the player how to operate and behave in the game's world, and then we could use that against them. So like this is number 5, gaslight them. And there's a big difference between the character scolding you in the game and the game scolding you. Like that, the ending of Bioshock, it's very frustrating because the entire time you're playing it, it's basically telling you to like be a bad person, and then at the end they scold you for being a bad person. But if you can have the characters scold you within the game instead of the world of the game scold you, it's a lot more effective, and you're not you don't have that element of ludonarrative dissonance. Another thing you can do is use play testing to see exactly how the player plays and rewrite your material to roast them, like basically insult them based on habits that normal players have during the game. Okay, and the last one is, the last rule we found was to develop writing alongside gameplay. It allows you, doing this, having the writer through the process the entire time, allows you to build the game's engine with story in mind. And the LucasArts approach, one of the reasons I also think that technology killed a lot of comedy in games is because game teams just became a lot bigger and more specialized, and all the departments sort of stopped working together. Like the Ron Gilbert and Tim Schafer approach, they were programmers, they were the people who led LucasArts, all those games I showed earlier. And they were programmers and writers, so they were around for every step of the way, and they made every decision going into the game, instead of just like coming in afterwards and writing dialogue around the mechanics of the game. And yeah, basically, it allows the game to have more story involvement from the ground level, which means a much more seamless and ultimately funner game. So that's it for me. If you guys have any questions, that'd be great. I was very nervous the entire time. I don't know why. Any questions? Yeah.
I'm curious in terms of like more modern games that you think have done comedy particularly well. What do you think are some good examples?
Well, I think the very well. But it's in a very traditional way. It's like it is like a movie. But I think like especially a lot of the mini games, because I think it was very savvy in that game. Have you played it? A lot of the mini games in the game are very unpleasant. Like they are obscene, and they sort of capitalize on the fact that if you want to get more story in the game, you have to. I'm not even going to say it because it's disgusting. It's like XXX rated, but you have to like. You have to do some very obscene things that feel uncomfortable. Like it makes the player squirm, and it kind of takes you into a very interesting direction. Portal 2. Like the most I've ever laughed during a game is the end of Portal 2 with the moon. Yeah, I don't want to ruin it, but it's a joke that they set up so early in the game, and afterward, and they also let you shoot that portal at them. Yeah, I don't know.
It's been long enough.
What?
It's been long enough.
The statute of limitations has expired. Okay. Yeah.
Since you actually bring up both Ron Gilbert and Tim Schafer, I'm assuming while you've been in development of this, you haven't actually gotten a chance to experience the last two comedic adventures they actually.
I played Thimbleweed. Yeah.
So you played Thimbleweed Park.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, how do you feel?
It's definitely of an old style. Yeah.
How do you feel about something like Broken Age, which does actually try to take it to the new level, just like something like, combining new mechanics with the old mechanics? That's just sort of what the Low Road also seemed to.
Yeah,
using that, that technology can actually now have, upgraded graphics, but still use an old school game style.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that in terms of also approaching, you choosing the puzzles and the storyline. How did you approach that in terms of?
We tried to sort of simplify the puzzles and storyline. Like Thimbleweed is very old school and
right.
elaborate and has that like Rube Goldberg kind of mechanism of like this leads to this, leads to this, leads to this, leads to this, and it's for like a nostalgic patient player. And Broken Age is very. I think like anyone can get through it.
Yeah,
you don't really
pretty.
need a walkthrough. And I mean, it's just two different approaches, and we tried to steer more towards the Broken Age, just because it was appealing to
okay.
casual gamers. Yeah. I think I should get out of here because we're already running